In order for this course to truly be complete, I wanted to make sure that we had the perspective from someone on the other side of the table, the recruiting perspective. And so I talked to a bunch of recruiters, and I'm including 2 case studies here of recruiters who tell me what advice would they have for a candidate, and in particular, what would they suggest in order for a candidate to maximize their power or leverage in a negotiation. So we'll start with a recruiter from Meta. This is someone who had a ton of industry experience, and she was at Facebook, now Meta, and then she joined eventually Pinterest. So a couple things that were interesting here is that tactic that I shared earlier about I will sign the offer if you meet me at this particular number. She said that that's actually a very effective tactic if you are sincere about it. So it'll completely backfire and you will lose a ton of trust and credibility if you make that offer and the recruiter comes back and meets it, but you don't actually commit. So obviously you have to be careful about what exactly you're saying when you put that condition there. The other thing that was interesting about this scenario is that you should be prepared to defend or explore alternatives if you're going to go this route. And so if you say, hey, I want $30,000 more of equity, then the recruiter might come back and say, hey, what if we gave you 10,000 more in equity and 10,000 more in a signing bonus? Would that do the trick for you? So then make sure you're prepared to have some rationale about why the equity is so much more important for you and what would be the kind of importance level to meet that number. Throughout the interaction that she had with all the candidates, she definitely preferred to talk over the phone. And for her, it wasn't so much about being able to read the candidate and figure out how to somehow manipulate them. Certainly wasn't that. And her intention was she wanted to build a deeper relationship with the candidate, give them the information they needed, and figure out where their head was at in order to get them closer to committing. So it was genuinely coming from a place of, I'd like to be able to help. Of course, I mean, that may not be what the candidate wants because the candidate wants to have as much time and information as possible. So there is a tension there, but that is the explanation for why she really preferred to have phone calls over emails. Another thing that we talked about quite a bit was exploding offers. And the idea of an exploding offer is that a company will give you the offer and say, hey, you have 48 hours. Tell us whether you want it or not. And she said that these exploding offers are almost always fake. The reason why companies do this is that recruiters know that time kills all deals. This is a very common expression in the recruiting world. That if you put a candidate out there or you put a job offer out there for a candidate and you just wait a week and you don't hear back anything, there's like no communication, then you might as well consider that candidate lost. Time is really dangerous when it comes to closing out a job requisite. And so her perspective was that is why some recruiters will put a lot of pressure and tell candidates that you need to decide by Monday or by the weekend or whatever it might be. Usually there's no actual teeth or there's no actual enforcement of the exploding offer. So when you are told that, hey, you have, X amount of hours to decide, what you should ask is, what is the timing constraint? I spent several weeks of my time interviewing. I did a bunch of phone screens and a bunch of on-site interviews. And I don't understand why we have to make a decision within 24 hours or 48 hours after all that time went by. But you're kind of calling them out a little bit and trying to understand what is the real consequence of the company giving you an extra week or two to decide. So when you do ask for more time, then the recruiter will ask why. And so again, you should be prepared to have a good discussion about, I need more time because this is a huge decision for me and I want to make sure I have all the data on the table. I want to make sure I do the right thing for me and the right thing for the company. I don't want buyer's remorse. And so that's why I'd really appreciate if you could just give me about 10 more days. By then I'll have a lot more data. And in the meantime, I'll make sure I communicate with you if anything changes. So as long as you are updating the recruiter and telling them that what the status is, they are often willing or able to extend the deadline. The last thing that we talked about was what happens when things work out. And that comes in 2 different flavors. One is if the candidate got the offer but then rejected the company, and then also if the company turns down the candidate. So in the case where the candidate turns down the company, then this recruiter told me that she has actually maintained connections across several years where, because the candidate was clearly good enough to pass the hiring bar, then they were able to expedite their process or get them back into the company a little while later. And so the takeaway for all of you is, if you get the offer, make sure that you maintain that connection and you leave it on a positive note, because most companies are more than willing to take you back in, even if you turn them down. On the other hand, if the company rejects you, then usually there's some cool down period, somewhere between 6 months or a year. And then at that point, the candidate is allowed to re-interview. And there's no harm in doing that. So there's not like some sort of tainted impression of a candidate who got rejected. Many people at these big tech companies that are interviewing a ton of people, they will reject candidates many times before they finally get the offer. So that's totally normal, and there's not really any kind of negative signal